Good evening and welcome to the Wicked Local Bristol Norfolk Senate District debate. I'm Brett Ryan, the editor of the Medfield Press. This is Keith Ferguson, the editor of the Walpole Times. And this is Phil Salisbury, the editor of the Sharon Advocate. And we're going to be moderating our debate tonight. Our candidates, Jeff Bailey, to our right, and Senator Jim Timilty to our left. The format of the debate is each one of us will ask one of the candidates a question. They'll have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will then have 2 minutes to rebut. If they get into it, we'll let them get into it for a bit. And then we'll conclude with 2-minute closing statements from each of the candidates. We'll be out of here by 8 o'clock, so you guys can get home to watch. I hear there's another debate tonight. I don't know about that.
There is one?
That's what I hear. I don't know. So you guys will be home in time for that. We flipped a coin, and the first question is for Senator Timilty. And Keith is going to ask.
Senator Timilty, how would you describe state spending right now in the State House? If you believe spending is an issue, what would you do to curb it, and what areas would you focus on?
Well, Keith, and thank you very much, obviously, the Wicked Local for this debate. But the state can only spend that which it takes in the course of a year. We cannot deficit spend like the federal government. And in fact, we invested in education and health care. And in times which were bad, which we saw very recently with the collapse of Bear Stearns, AIG, and the Lehman Brothers, we took a measured approach to our spending, but did not shortchange a generation of students and kept the 5-year plan for Chapter 70 spending, K-12 education, which is very important to the community of Medfield and Walpole and Sharon, three of the most excellent school systems that there are. So when you think of it, it's obviously we're bound by the Constitution, only spend what we have. I think spending is going at a measured rate and completely different from what's happening at the federal level, and we're investing in our future, we're investing in our children, and it's paying dividends as it has, as Massachusetts is the light on a hill, as it were, for public education in Massachusetts, in the Commonwealth, in the nation.
Well, I'm sure this will come as a great shock, but I disagree in one aspect of it. I believe that we are spending too much at the state level. Certainly, the senator is correct when he says we can't spend any more than what we take in, but certainly there are issues that we really must deal with. We have unfunded pension liabilities. We have a health care system that is now consuming 41% of the state budget. We need to get a handle on that. We have several basic issues that we just need to wrestle with. Senator Timilty has a definite philosophy of how things ought to go at the State House. I'll just share a few of the things that I differ with when it comes to the spending issues, and certainly he'll have an opportunity to respond to these things, and that's as it should be. But I believe that we need serious pension reform at the state level. We need to raise the retirement age from 55 to 60. Senator Timilty voted against that pension reform. He voted against moving those who receive mass health to managed care. That would have saved the state $100 million. He voted against it. He voted to preserve the hack holidays, Evacuation Day and Bunker Hill Day. He voted to bail out the city of Lawrence for $35 million. The governor maintains an office in the District of Columbia, which I feel is completely unnecessary. We have congressmen who perform the duties down there. The governor doesn't need an office. He voted against cutting the governor's D.C. office. And then he voted to keep paying state employees for volunteer work. So there are a number of issues that I feel that we need to really kind of get a grip on, and we certainly need to exercise more fiscal restraint. Yes, we are staying generally within the budget numbers, although the budget numbers are down just a little bit, and we're a little bit short. We need to stay in, but I think that our priorities need to change as well.
Senator, would you like to respond?
And I would also like to point out that many of these contracts that had been that the good pastor talks about had been previous to my getting in, and it is part of a contract that was bargained for at many of the local levels. And until and unless the local level is willing to change the way that they bargain contracts, I wasn't going to do something at the State House that changed that. But I think it's also important to note that Massachusetts, out of the 50 states, has the third best stabilization fund. So even though we were crippled in the financial services sector, in the core mission of what state government does, taking care of human services, those who are infirm, who are disabled, we did not back away from that. Taking care of, as I say, Chapter 70, when you think of the town of Medfield, where 25% of your population is in public school, we've done the job, and we've prioritized our spending. Some of these the issues, votes back and forth, were very small in comparison with what we did overall in state spending. And I would suggest that 41% of the dollars that we have going towards health care is keeping people healthy. It's keeping people, those who wouldn't have entered the world and those who would have left this world prior to this, based on our health care system, are there. And we are investing in health care, and I will continue to do that. And if that goes to 42%, I will be happy to be there, because it's the right thing to do.
Could I respond to that for just a moment? The pension reform that I was referring to are not local contracts that have been negotiated. I'm talking about state workers and moving that from 55 to 60. Certainly, that could have been done. The amendment was put there, and that vote could certainly have been taken. I do agree the stabilization count is good, and so the stewardship hasn't been bad. What I'm talking about is a difference in priorities and the kinds of things that we need to do. I agree that we need to make sure that we take care of our citizens as it relates to the health care, but we also need to be looking for savings everywhere that we can, and I don't think that's being done in a propitious way.
One last thing, if I may? Sure. Now, the 55 is for public safety professionals. Now, if you move that from 55 to 60, then all of a sudden you're asking, and I work as the chairman of the Public Safety Committee, I work with firefighters, I work with police officers, and I work with correction officers on a daily basis. Unlike many in the legislature or any other walk of life who are lawmakers or even on the municipal level, as the chair of public safety, I deal with them every day. You don't need a 60-year-old firefighter running up that ladder to save you and your children. You don't need a 60-year-old correction officer on the tiers in, say, Bristol House of Correction, where I was just a month ago, or in Walpole, in the disciplined detention unit. Those are very bad guys, and I'm telling you, 55 makes some sense, because they start to have injuries that we all pay for because they're serving us, they get injured in the line of duty, and then they go on disability and costing a tremendous amount. So 55 is a rational and reasonable approach for a public safety employee to retire, and I will not move that to 60.
As I understand where the senator's coming from on public safety, my own father was a police officer. My grandfather was a firefighter, so I'm certainly sympathetic to that argument. And my own father did take a disability retirement and had to before for the age of 60. My grandfather actually did go all the way to 62, because in Michigan, where I grew up, that was the retirement age. The last few years, he didn't climb up and down a ladder. He was a dispatcher. And so there were other opportunities, and I think that there are other opportunities within the firefighting course to keep them from doing that. But the senator's points are well taken as it relates to the public safety, and so I wouldn't have a problem with making some exemptions, and the correctional officers to make some exemptions there, but I believe that that is not the vast majority of the workers that we're talking about.
This was sort of brought up in the last question in regards to education. What's your take on the national Common Core standards for public schools compared to the Massachusetts standards?
As you know, or maybe you don't know, I am an educator. In 2001, I started a school. It is a private parochial school, so it's a little different than a public school system. Matter of fact, quite a bit different. But I still have stood in front of a classroom. I know what it means to take home papers and grade them on the weekends, and I know what it means to hire teachers, and I know what it means to have to fire a teacher. And I've read curriculum scopes and sequence till I felt my head was going to explode. So certainly, I'm familiar with education. As it relates to the national core standards, they are lower than the Massachusetts standards were. When education reform was instituted, and MCAS was instituted, we saw a significant increase. The trajectory was extremely high, and by the end of the Romney administration, we were #1 in the nation as far as education is concerned. Now, we're still there, but since 2008, we have have leveled off. There's no question about that. All the peer-reviewed studies demonstrate that. We've leveled off, and that happens to coincide with the adoption of the national core standards, which are lower than Massachusetts standards. So my feeling is we need to return to the higher Massachusetts state standards in order to be able to have the kind of academic achievement that we want.
Well, I think I agree with the pastor. I have many concerns about what comes from Washington as it relates to putting standards on us for education, because as I said, Massachusetts is the best. And when you take a look at 1976, their track record isn't that good. With the IDEA was promised to be, IDEA Act was fully funded. That was the promise from the federal government in '76. Hasn't come near that. I don't think it ever got over 50%, in which case that burden fell, and somebody has to take it, and I'm glad that the state stepped up and did that. But No Child Left Behind came in and didn't give, it was no dollars flowing with that for many of the school systems that I represent. So when you take a look at it with a locally elected school committee here in these communities and a solid parent-teacher organization, dedicated staff, the children are going to four-year accredited colleges at the same pace they were in the 80s. And I think that's because you have a solid foundation for education in this state. You also have a solid foundation at the townhouse, at the school department, and in our schools. And our kids are achieving. As a product of Boston and Canton Public Schools, I feel very good and very proud of the way Massachusetts educates its children. And I would say that since we have the best standards here, we ought to step away from the barbarity of over-testing these children and looking for snapshots, because I don't think that gives a full measure of what a student is achieving. And if you take a look at it, and you take a real look at it, not from DOE's perspective where there is a hierarchy and it's a morass of bureaucracy, but when you take a look at it on the local level here in this auditorium, Monday through Friday between 7 and 2 o'clock, you're going to find that our public education system works well, and you're going to find that many of these kids are going on, and not just kids in your traditional high schools, but also in the regional schools, in the Norfolk Aggie, which is across the street from my house. It's an extraordinary place. And we are succeeding, and I would be very concerned with the watering down of the standards from the national level.
I'm thankful that the senator brought up the issue of the testing. He did vote against adding the U.S. history exam on the MCAS, and has not been in favor of MCAS as a general rule, and he indicated that here just a few minutes, has definite concerns. And I would agree that MCAS isn't perfect, but we need an assessment. As I said, we had that trajectory that after MCAS was instituted, we saw, that increase across the state. Now, there are school districts, and I would put Medfield in that category, which achieve at very high levels. But there are also school districts that don't achieve at quite as high levels, and we know what works in education. As I said, I'm an educator. I know that the first and foremost thing that we need is great teachers in every single classroom. We need to make sure that the standards for our teachers are maintained and are very high standards. We need to make sure that we have a disciplined learning and effective learning environment. We know absolutely these things. We know that smaller class sizes to help to a certain extent. We know that parental involvement is absolutely essential. In a town like Medfield, that parental involvement is there, and we see that. But we do need assessments. We should not be taking away from the MCAS standards. When the amendment came that the State Department of Education should maintain the MCAS standard, the senator voted against maintaining that standard, and that conviction is still here tonight. And that's it's an area of difference, but he certainly has said that's where he stands, and that's fine. I don't stand there, and so there's an area of difference that we have.
Oh, thank you. I've never said that we shouldn't have standards. What I've said is that occasionally, when there is big government spending, sometimes you can have public sector empire creating, and the MCAS is a perfect example of that. We did have testing before MCAS. We had something right off the shelf. It was the Iowa tests. We had tests to give ourselves a snapshot, but we didn't rely the total school performance on MCAS tests. Now, when you take a look at when MCAS came out, it was written out of a company in Texas, and then later on was written out of a company in New Hampshire. So if you take a look at it, this just created a bureaucracy, and it sent state dollars outside of the state, when, if you think of it, as I've said, and I think my opponent has agreed, that Massachusetts is the best that education has to offer, both in K through 12, but also in our universities. So why wouldn't this have been a Massachusetts test when you could have, at very little dollars in comparison with what was spent on MCAS from '93 on, you could have had a test that worked very well in the early '90s and the late '80s and gave us an idea of where our students were. And I think if you take a look at any kind of measure, but certainly one that says where do our children in public school go to four-year accredited colleges, you're going to find that in '87, '89, and '91, it's going to be the exact same or very close to an analysis of the data as it was in '95, '97, '99, and even into this decade. So I am suggesting that sometimes you have to be aware what looks good on paper, what has a great headline, isn't necessarily the best way to do government. And as I say, and it happened with the T and it happened with the Big Dig, you have a quasi group of people who used to work in government who then create their own public sector empire and profit from it to the harm of our taxpayers. So that's where I am, looking a little bit beyond the headline and down into the minutia of government policy and trying to make a change. So was it politically popular? No. But do I stand by it? Absolutely. And I'm correct. Over time, it will be borne out.
So it is your position that you would like to discontinue the MCAS as a testing system, or would like to change the MCAS system?
I would like to go to any other cheaper model that would be available that's used in other nations or, as I say, not other nations, excuse me, other states, like something like, as I said, right off the shelf like the Iowa test or something of their equivalent right now.
I have a private school. We're not allowed to take the MCAS. It's considered proprietary, so we do standardized test our students each year. We use the Stanford Achievement Test. And the Senator is correct. We find it to be very adequate. But the MCAS has serviced us well. And I understand that, where he's come from on some of the expenses. I certainly would like to save money anywhere that we can, but it's here. I was walking around the school here tonight before the debate. I was looking for the auditorium, so I was up on the second floor. The janitorial staff directed me after they found out who I was. They directed me to where I was supposed to go. But I was looking at doors. The MCAS test scores are being posted on the doors of the schools here with congratulations to all the students. I think it is something that is building and encouraging our students. I think it's been a good thing. Senator thinks that we can do better, and I think that we can certainly improve at MCAS, but I like the system that we have.
Final word, Senator?
No, fine with that.
Okay. So my question is for you, Senator.
Sure, Brett.
And it's a two-part question. Do you think Massachusetts has a problem with cronyism and nepotism in state government? And if so, how would you propose to solve that problem?
Well, I think the clear fact of the matter is the Ware report over probation has scared and appropriately scared many in the Commonwealth, and certainly something has to be done. And we did enact the strongest ethics reform laws in the country. And based on a Herald article, it doesn't look as though the state agencies were adhering to those policies. So therefore, it looks like there's going to be a stem to stern work. I don't know if moving probation under the governor would meet constitutional needs, but certainly something has to be done. And whether it's more of a anecdotal evidence or certainly evidence when putting more people like the Ware report, and I think the Ware report was suggested by the legislature, is that it came out with practices that weren't the best for the Commonwealth, and in fact there were people who were being, in a matter of civil rights, who were being passed over for promotion, and there are going to be serious penalties for those people who did that, and that's appropriate. So moving forward, anything that can be about transparency and showing people how important it is that the best people go to work for the public dollar, I think would be great. It would be open to any suggestions and be willing to work with anybody on a solution.
I have some suggestions as we go here. Not a surprise once again. As we look, obviously, at the probation scandal, that's the most recent one. The probation scandal is you had people recommending friends and cronies to positions that they weren't qualified for. There seems to be no real repentance of those things and no real sorrow over those things. In fact, the president of the Senate, Senator Murray, is mentioned several times in the Ware report, and she's leading the Democrat Senate, and she is up to her neck in it. There is no question about that, but there are some of the other senators who have written it as well. Now, I would I don't want to be disagreeable with Senator Timilty. To his credit, was not involved in any of those things, and I want to make that very clear. There is no evidence that he was involved in any of this cronyism or any of the corruption. But that corruption, in my opinion, is systemic. It is not just about the probation department. It is about the entire way that the legislature does business. There isn't an openness, there isn't a transparency with the way the legislature goes about doing things. First of all, they have exempted themselves from the open meeting laws that they require of other government entities. They have exempted themselves from the public records laws. Whereas, once again, in the local committees and other things, they have to do those things. It is time to post committee votes online. Too many things are happening in committees, and there is no transparency. There is no public record of it. The senator voted against posting committee votes online. We need to discontinue controversial bills in informal sessions. Senator Murray, just a couple of summers ago during informal session, kept trying to cram through a wind sighting bill, and it kept being defeated because there were a couple of people there, a couple of Republican senators who wouldn't let it go through. But we've got to end the kind of system that would allow for that kind of abuse. We need to quit allowing voice votes on significant issues. We need to stop bundling amendments and passing them voice votes. I was appalled when I watched the Senate budget debate passing through amendments, and the amendment dealing with the Medfield State Hospital being done on a voice vote. I have to stop, but I'm sure I'll have a chance to finish here in a few minutes.
Well, I'm sorry, Medfield State Hospital was not done on a voice vote. As a matter of fact,
if I'm mistaken, I apologize.
It was done on a roll call, and I voted against it.
Yes, you did. Yes, I did see, and I apologize if I mischaracterized that.
Not only voted against it, I voted against the emergency preamble about it taking effect. I think that's the only time in the 8 years I've been up there that somebody did that. You know, obviously there are things that should be done and have been done based on the archaic way the legislature has worked, and that process will evolve. I think that there will be new matters taken up during rules debate for whoever's elected, and they have their opportunity to make a change should they see that, and try to convince, as you do, you have to convince 39 others, and then you have to convince 160, and it's a very difficult place to change the way things always were done, because you've got to invest your time appropriately. And I can understand somebody who'd want to go in there and get to work on that. I'm going to choose to go, if elected, I'm going to choose to go and work very hard on making certain that my communities that I represent are kept whole as we see what happens in a very uncertain world, in a very uncertain federal government, regardless of whoever operates. I think my job for the 170,000 people that I go to work for will be to ensure that we make sure that the dollars flow right back to the people. And when you take a look at it, informal session, the good pastor brought up about a bill that was stopped. You could stop a bill. The Move Over Law. I passed the Move Over Law in an informal session. That's a stationary emergency vehicle with its lights on. You're required to move out of a lane and into a non-adjacent traffic lane so that people are safe on the side of the road. There are opportunities for you to get many things done in an informal session. I think there was some concern, and however archaic it is, about a lame duck legislature, because lame ducks in any regard sometimes don't answer to the people the way that somebody who is looking certainly to be elected the next time would answer them. So my goal is to work not just on the rules that day when rules debate is open, but also to do my job for the people, bringing the dollars back.
I certainly believe that you need to take care of your district and do the constituent service that the voters hire us to do. But I don't believe that you have to sacrifice that in order to make sure that we have a transparent system that will restore the trust of the Commonwealth. I believe that you have to, I mean, I understand, I've taught government classes, so I do understand you have to persuade. You're not the administration, you're the legislature, so you have to persuade the others. But you're not going to persuade the others if you just hold up your hands and say, you know, this is just the way it's always been done and there's nothing I can do about it. I believe that you need to be forceful. I believe you need to keep screaming about it. You need to continue putting forward the rules and debating those rules. And I'm just not seeing it. I'm not necessarily holding Senator Timilty directly responsible for this. It's the Democrat legislature, and that's who they are. They are trying to. They're passing all of these various bills behind closed doors. I mean, the budget is presented. It's a big document, and then it's voted on in just one day. We have a massive health care bill that was put out at 8 o'clock on a Monday night, was on the governor's desk the next day. No way that anybody could ever read that bill. I believe that we should put bills into print 72 hours in advance. That's not being done. because the party that's in power has been there so long that they don't believe that they're really answerable to anyone anymore. They just continue doing what they want to do. And when they're in safe districts, where they don't even get an opponent, and only a very few of the offices are even contested, they're free to do whatever they want. I believe that this district has an opportunity to send a message to Beacon Hill. We're not satisfied with business as usual. I'm not saying that I'm going to go up there and 100 or 200 people or 199 other people are just going to fall in line and say, hey, I'm going to do whatever that Bailey guy says. I'm not that naive. But I don't believe that you ever accomplish anything unless you're willing to work very hard to do so.
As it relates to bundling of amendments, if you get bundled, then that's your own fault, because you have the ability in the Senate. They announced that there is a no pile, and it's a matter that may not be voted on by the membership hasn't indicated a willingness to vote for that. What you have to do is remove your amendment from a pile that is a no, that is the bundle, and bring it up for debate and do your best to try to convince the 39 others. So it's not a matter of you not being able to get your amendment heard. I can't speak to what happens in the House, but in the Senate you can have an impact. And also, as it relates to committee hearings, I have chaired a committee in my 8 years, municipalities and regional government in my first 2 years, and in the last 6, the Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee. And we post our hearings with all the bills that we're going to have, and we bring everybody in who can come in. And as a matter of fact, on my landmark reform of the state 911 system, it was the first distance for those who had a distance problem based on being somewhere in the state who had disabilities and couldn't get in. We made an effort. It took us about 2 weeks to have participation both on a TTY phone and also on a phone and a computer generated, so people who had disabilities could deal with their providers who could help them communicate. So it was actually a hearing for state 911, and we know that anybody with disabilities is 7 times more likely through the course of their life of dialing 911. And part of that landmark reform is that the people with disabilities were not only heard, but they participated, and they were allowed to. So I don't think there's ever been a complaint about the way I've run my public safety committees, because anybody can participate, and I go out and chase them down if I think that their voice will be very important to the matter.
But the votes that are actually taken in committee are not posted online, so we really don't know where the members of your committee have voted on different issues as they have come before your committee. Am I correct in saying that, or am I mischaracterizing that?
Based on my charm and effectiveness, we've never had a close one.
You've never had a close vote?
In the committee, no.
Okay. I don't know what that says exactly, other than the proportion of Republicans and Democrats is 36-4. So certainly you're not going to have many close votes when you outnumber the opposition by that significant of a
and just a little aside about the legislative process, you'll find that the Public Safety Committee, whereas the Senate President and the Speaker appoint the members, there is Republican representation, and based on attendance, because it only counts on who's there, Republicans, generally speaking, in the Public Safety Committee, because that's their bailiwick, members of former police officers, former correction officers, somebody who worked for Sheriff Cummings, Republicans outnumber Democrats in terms of participation on the Public Safety Committee. And I, as somebody who has been qualified, outside interests have said that I've been the most bipartisan, most independent senator. I work very well with them because we deal with members, not parties, not in the Public Safety Committee.
A lot of numbers embedded into this question, so please bear with me.
Okay.
Unemployment has dropped from 5.7% to 4.9% in Walpole over the past year, 5.2% to 4.9% in Medfield, and 5.6% to 4.4% in Sharon. This compared to the current national unemployment rate of 7.8% and the state rate of 6.5%. What do you make of those statistics, and what do you attribute that to?
Well, certainly the 3 towns that you've mentioned have done very well, and I'm thankful for that. I'm not one of these candidates who are running for office who roots for the state to do poorly so I can get electoral advantage out of it. So I'm thankful for the progress and the way that folks are employed here. Certainly in those 3 towns you have a much higher level of education than you are. Down in Attleboro, though, which is also part of the district, and it's the part of the district where I live, the unemployment rate is 9%. And we have the unemployment rate in Massachusetts is actually creeping up. It went from 6.3 or 6.1 to 6.3, and if it weren't for the 2,500 state workers that were hired, it would be closer to 6.5. So the trends are moving away from the employment picture that we're looking for. So as I see it, it's not quite as rosy as we would look. Although once again, I'm not unhappy that these towns are doing well. You have different demographics, and each town has its own unique experiences. But once again, you'll find that the workers in these towns, as a general rule, are higher educated and are in the fields. But that's not exclusive. Obviously, there are some exceptions to that. Whereas in other parts of the district, it is not as much. So that's what I would attribute it to. But I'm certainly not unhappy about it.
I think you're going to find that overall Bristol and Norfolk is, they're excellent communities and all have different challenges and all have different opportunities. But I do believe that based on the national average and Massachusetts average as a whole, we're showing that even though we're a high-cost state, that we're competitive. And the reason why we're competitive is because we continually invest in education. We can continually invest in our environment, which is so important. You have these wonderful bucolic towns where people who go to college want to come and want to move. They want to stay here because we have an excellent school systems and we have an excellent backyard, as it were. And I think that the government's role in the economy is sometimes priming the pump, but more importantly, getting out of the way. But only getting out of the way to the extent that you still have some regulations that you can blow the whistle. Because if you don't have that person to blow the whistle, then you have some of the instances that I'm dealing all across my district, from Maple Ave in Seekonk, where an old mill was on fire, a mill that created the first tennis racket, but was a dye manufacturing plate. So now in a neighborhood, you have a polluted site. Also Walton and Lonsbury, an old jewelry manufacturing company. So there are some legacies of the Industrial Revolution and the buildup in the past century in Massachusetts that we have to pay for. So we need to ease regulation in smart places, but also keep the regulation and also always be ready to respond so we can take care of the economic well-being. I don't think there's a greater example of that than the Spack landfill, where I've been in Norton, where I've been involved with the federal government in the neighborhood, keeping the principal responsible parties like Texas Instruments feet to the fire about cleaning that up. That's $70 million. So if you don't have a vigorous government with a certain amount of environmental rules, you can destroy a town. And take a look at the healthcare costs of autism and cancer and so forth. There's a problem in our environment. We got to get rid of it.
I would agree with the Senator completely on when it relates to smart environmental regulation. Certainly we want to maintain our quality of life and maintain the kind of society that we wish to live in. But there are numerous business regulations that are onerous. We have an independent contractor law that's making it very difficult for independent contractors to even do business in the state of Massachusetts. They're moving to Rhode Island and moving to New Hampshire. Why? Because the state legislature has determined that when those independent contractors take a job with a company, they actually become an employee of that company, and that company, even if that's an out-of-state company, they have to pay taxes, they have to do all kinds of other reporting, and these things. It's an onerous rule in business. Probably the most onerous thing we talk about, the regulation of business, is the home-based daycare forced unionization. You knew that was coming. As we were talking, because we've kind of gone on that one before, and so we'll discuss it here. But the home-based daycare forced unionization is to put anybody who takes a state voucher, putting them into a state union. But the state legislature, they could have raised the amount of that voucher and did not do so. Senator Timothy, to his credit, did vote to raise that voucher. But the rest of his party, who voted to force them into unionization, did not. And so those home-based daycare workers are are having money going out of their vouchers, going right to the unions. There is no improvement in child care. There's no increased compensation to the workers. They have less money than what they had before. There is no benefits. They get no health benefits, no pension benefits, no disability benefits. There is absolutely no benefit for it. In my view, it is a direct transfer of money from the state treasury into the public sector union.
I disagree wholeheartedly with that, and that's what happens in legislature. You have yeses and nos, no maybes, and that move was not about putting unions in daycare center. No, that was about wages, hours, and working conditions. And what that was that, especially now making that vote, I'm proud of that vote, because as a parent of a 5 and an 8-year-old, now they're in public school, but having dropped them off at daycare, that's the most important job I would suggest that somebody has in that day. When you take literally the loved ones, the treasures of a family, that's the most important thing in my wife Mary and my life. If you have a 5 and 8-year-old to go there, you want to make certain that that person is paid appropriately for doing the most important job in the Commonwealth. So it wasn't about forcing private daycares to do anything. What it was allowing was, if you were going to participate in a state voucher system, then you were going to have to pay an appropriate wage for somebody who does a very important job. It did allow them to collectively bargain, but what it is it's not moving state money from the Treasury into unions' pockets. It's moving that. You're going to take a state voucher to do this very important job. You're going to pay an appropriate wage for the excellent work that we expect you to do and that these kids, these children deserve. And it's also, these daycare providers also have a seat at the table, because they have to go in with A&F and negotiate over what the appropriate rate is for all of these workers across the state. So it's not a patchwork. If you're going to take state money to do a job, you're going to be paid appropriately. It's not about unionization so much it is wages, hours, and working conditions, and a very important job should be paid the rate that it should. And this is also subject to appropriation by the legislature. So the law has no impact unless the legislature so funds it.
With all due respect, Senator, I don't see how taking money out of their vouchers is going to increase their compensation and giving them a fair wage for what they've done. Once again, the Senate at any time and the legislature at any time could raise the amount of that voucher. They didn't choose to do so. Instead, they chose to do this. Now, as they go before the table, say, well, now that you're represented by a union, now maybe we'll consider raising the amount of that voucher. But this is not going to increase or improve the amount of money that is going to come to any of these workers. In fact, it's going to take money away from them. That voucher is $28 a day. That's $3.36 an hour, if my math is correct, and it might not be. But that is not much of a pay, and the Senator has rightly recognized that that's not much. But putting them in the union or giving them the union the right to negotiate for them, why do they need a union to negotiate? If the Senate feels that they're not getting enough money, give them more. It is just simply a matter of a vote, and it's a vote that they voted no on. So there is absolutely no value. And as far as improving the amount of education, SEIU is not going to improve early childhood education. That's not their expertise. I would say that perhaps there might be a little bit of logic in it if they had put it into the Massachusetts Teachers Association, which has a little bit of expertise in this area. But SEIU has no expertise, and they are not going to be guaranteeing the standards. The guaranteeing of the standards is done by the state inspectors. This does nothing to improve state inspections, and these home daycares go through all kinds of inspections already. So this isn't going to do anything to improve anything about child care. It's not going to give them any more money. All it does is give the unions a little bit more union dues.
We're clearly going to disagree on this for the rest of the evening and the rest of the campaign. No, it is about setting the rate of what they're compensated. So if you're going to take state money when you operate one of these things, if you want to do it without state money, do what you want. But if you're going to take state money, you're going to have to guarantee that these people who do this very important job are paid a certain rate. And it needs to be a standard rate across the Commonwealth for everybody who does this important job. And it shouldn't be based on the whim of the person who operates the daycare if they're going to take the state money. If they take the state money, they should pay that person. So it doesn't go to the operator. It goes to the person who's down there on the ground playing with the children in one of those daycares and who are doing the most important job. And as I say, I'm adamant about this because just very recently, having dropped my daughters off at daycare providers, this is very important to me, and I'm not going to change it. As I said, very proud of the vote.
Okay, and I guess we'll just have to let the voters decide, but I would say this, that the legislature has already set the amount of that voucher. It's $28 a day, and it's the same across the Commonwealth. You don't need a union to set the amount of the voucher. Once again, my belief is that it is a straight exchange from the state coffers into union coffers.
Disagree.
You both mentioned the environment in the last question. What would it take for an expanded bottle bill to pass in the legislature, and what would you do to support it? It's fizzled in the last couple of legislative sessions.
Well, in concept, I believe in the water bottles, one of the water bottles which you provided for me so kindly this evening, that there should be something. I do believe in our curbside recycling. It's getting better, but the overwhelming problem would be for small business. It is not the same as the can that we have on the big recyclers. They have a better means with which. I don't know what happened here. They have a better means with which to deal with returns coming back, but the small mom-and-pop grocery stores, particularly in some of the urban settings, just have no room for anything to deal with this. And as it has become, sadly, a job for some in many urban settings, it would overwhelm the small business owner, and in fact put them in a position of being competitively disadvantaged, because they would have to pay for those plastic bottles. They'd have to collect them, keep them, and then pass them on. So until and unless we can find a better way to do the recycling program, or help them with the recycling program, I think that small business would be against an expanded bottle bill, and therefore I don't anticipate it passing the legislature anytime soon, and that's why it did not pass the legislature this time.
I don't have a whole lot to say other than I agree with the senator on every point that he just made. That may make him rethink his position, I'm not sure, but
no, absolutely
nonetheless.
Not. Absolutely not.
We do agree on that. I don't think that it's a good idea for small businesses, and rather just repeat everything that he said. I'm sure there's other questions that you have. So I agree with the senator. We're on the same page there. I don't believe it's going to pass. I don't believe it should.
Thank you. I have a question for Jeff. So, big story here in Medfield is a group wants to open a Dunkin' Donuts franchise on the corner of Main Street and North Meadows Road, which is the busiest intersection in town, formerly the site of a Friendly's. Would you support that?
When it comes to those kinds of issues, we have local elected officials to determine, zoning issues and whether it's in the best interest of the town. My basic approach to those kinds of issues is to get out of the way and let the local officials deal with those issues the way that they see fit. I've met the local officials here in Medfield. I may not agree with all of them on every issue as it relates to things, but I certainly trust them to make the decisions that are in the best interest of the town. So unless they would come to me and ask specifically, here is what we need you to do in order to be able to facilitate this, and we're behind this and we're supporting this, that's a local issue. I pretty well would stay out of it.
Senator?
That's a matter that's entirely up to those elected officials and appointed officials in the townhouse, in concert with town meeting, the appropriate legislative body for the town, and they will deal with the local interested business owners in memo and other abutters, and that's entirely a local matter.
How much would you say your religion affects your policy stances? Specifically, in which issues do you turn to your faith to make a decision?
I would say that obviously the principles of my upbringing, which is Catholic, obviously have some role in my education. I was educated by the Jesuits for a number of years as well, so I've had the Catholic education. But in the role as state senator, I'm a state employee, and this wonderful country was founded on a separation of church and state. So you have to bring your principles to bear, but when it comes to doing the job that I have, I will try to do the best to represent and lead, and I think in many respects, whether it's been an issue that hits somebody about what happens in their life, or whether it's a governmental issue, I think I've been able to balance that and will continue. So at this point, it's my upbringing and my values and my principles and my philosophy, but I'm also not unused to hearing a different policy or a different matter or a different perspective of somebody of a different faith or a different background or even from a different walk of life. And I pledge to listen and give my effort and my industry and my conscience. But I will do the governmental job to the best level that I can. And remember, as always, when you were sworn in, as I've been fortunate enough to 4 times, you're a state employee. So therefore, religion shouldn't be involved in the course of your governmental day.
Okay, well, this question certainly hits close to home for me. There's no question about that. As I said, I've been a pastor for 24 years. Before I actually answer the question, allow me to take a moment and commend my opponent, and I mean this sincerely. Senator Timilty and I, as a pastor in Attleboro, I've had to work with his office, and we both, he represents Attleboro, and I also serve in Attleboro. And Senator Timilty has never done anything that I feel would compromise the town or embarrass the town as it relates to any of his activities. And he has always treated me with dignity and respect, and his staff has always done the same. And so I very much appreciate that. But as it relates to our religious convictions, I definitely believe in the separation of church and state. Here in Massachusetts, we had a state church until 1833. It was the Congregational Church, and it was the Baptists who led the way in the disestablishment. Isaac Backus out of Middleborough and Hezekiah Smith out of Haverhill were the leaders in disestablishing the church in Massachusetts. And that was long after the U.S. Constitution was established. I actually served for 2 years at the Baptist Church of Danbury, Connecticut. That was the church that Thomas Jefferson actually mailed his letter to. So I have cut my teeth on the issue of the separation of church and state. I agree with the senator. On Sundays, you come to my church, you're going to hear my religious views aggressively at my church. I don't hesitate to tell people what I believe and what I think that they ought to believe. But that's not the role of a state senator. It would not be my place to go up and try to infuse, if you will, my views or to enforce my views in any way. I have to listen in the same way the senator does. And regardless of what your religion may be, you're always going to wrestle with your conscience on certain issues. And so certainly, any issue that comes before you, you examine your conscience, you do what you feel is right, and then you stand before the voters and you give an explanation, and you either pay the price or you get the applause. And it's one way or the other. So I do not feel that my religion hurts me. I believe it enhances.
One of the questions on the ballots this year, it involves physician-assisted suicide. How will you vote on that initiative, and please explain your decision?
I believe this question is for...
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's for me. Okay. As it relates to physician-assisted suicide, my own view is I am opposed. If I have the time, I believe I'll give a story. The assistant pastor that has served with me for now more than 20 years, a number of years ago, he was diagnosed with inoperable cancer. He was told by the surgeons and the doctors up at Brigham and Women's, they said, there's nothing we can do for you. Go home, get your affairs in order. That was more than 20 years ago. Today, he is still teaching in our school. He is coaching our basketball teams, and this weekend he'll be coaching our soccer teams in a tournament. They told him that he would never be able to have children. He now has 3. Sometimes he may regret that. I don't know. But nonetheless, he has lived a very full life. The doctors were wrong. He would have been a prime candidate for this. I think it's a bad idea. Doctors are not infallible, and their diagnoses are not infallible. And so I would oppose this. When I go into the voting booth, I'm going to vote no. But my vote is no different than anyone else in this room. This is a state referendum, and each individual gets one vote, and that's the beauty of the referendum system. And so I'm telling you, I think it's a fair question, and I'll give you the flat-out answer. That's where I stand. But as a state senator, I don't have any more influence than anyone else does. I vote like everyone else does.
Having recently dealt with these topics on a personal level, very difficult. But I am also very concerned about any type of move in this manner. Certainly, you can't talk about a weightier topic, and that having it done by a ballot question I don't think would be sufficient in terms of public policy, only knowing from understanding through many of my constituents what previous ballot questions had meant to them on matter of decriminalization of marijuana, and then my dealings with local law enforcement and state law enforcement on the difficulties of of managing that, and also, you know, managing the understanding that it's still a federal law, and there could be problems from that. So legislating by ballot question is not in this instance the way to go on this type of topic, and I can feel for just about anybody on the topic. And I would suggest that at this point that, you know, having that understanding, that I sympathize with them, but I would suggest that it not be the time nor the vehicle with which we deal with such a matter of finality.
Do you support a sales tax holiday?
Absolutely. I've supported a sales tax holiday, voted for it every time, have an understanding of it's quite a bit of a gimmick, but it works. And that's what sales is inevitably. And in times where we were talking about doing a sales tax increase, I was trying to remind my colleagues that sometimes you take the money on the front end and not understand what happens in volume on the back end. And I know this just from the alcohol excise tax. Chris Casbaro, who owns a number of liquor stores on the border on Seekonk and Attleboro line with Rhode Island, laid off 12 employees right after that was instituted. So there was, not right after Christmas when that was instituted, there was 12 people who lost their paycheck just based on a vote. So not only have I voted for the sales tax holiday every time, but also sponsored the sales tax holiday and sponsored the permanent sales tax holiday, which was included in this summer's economic development bill, along with transportation investments and lowering the corporate tax for those new filers who were coming in for 3 years. So we're kind of trying to prime the pump, and we understood that in doing that, maybe making an August back-to-school sales tax holiday would be a boon to everybody in retail, and that's very important.
I would concur, and certainly, I would once again recognize the senator did support the sales tax holiday, and he supported the permanent tax holiday. His party, unfortunately, did not. They did not pass a permanent tax holiday. They did pass the temporary one. So I was disappointed in that, but I was thankful that the senator supported the permanent tax holiday. It is a boon to the economy. There's no question about that. We have, you see the volume that is sold on that weekend. It tells you what sales taxes do. So we need to make it permanent. We need to fight to make it permanent, and we need to send a clear message to Beacon Hill. Business as usual is not good enough. We want these things, and we want them right now.
I want to thank both candidates for your responses to our questions tonight. It's been very enlightening. As we're coming to the close of the debate, I would give both of you 2 minutes to make a final statement. Again, by coin toss, it's been decided that Jim Timilty will give the first final statement.
Thanks, Brett, and thanks very much, and certainly would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to thank my colleague in this campaign and my colleague from earlier months in the working for the police department in Attleboro and working in the parish. We have had an excellent campaign, and it's been a wonderful discourse of issues, and I appreciate his time and, again, his collegiality in this effort. But I really want to thank the people of Medfield, Walpole, and Sharon. For the last 8 years, I've had the privilege and honor of representing you in the Massachusetts Senate, and I've treasured that role. It has been one of the best times of my life. I have enjoyed immensely every day of work, and I think I try to I've gotten better each day that I've gone to work. And I just want to take my experience, my record of success, and my vision, my hope for a better Commonwealth for my family and for your family, and go to work for you on Beacon Hill on matters of education, environment, health care, public safety, and economic development. Those are the issues that matter to you and to your family and to my family. And I think we've moved the Commonwealth in very difficult circumstances, economic circumstances. I think we've moved the Commonwealth forward. And I look forward to the challenges and opportunities that come. And I ask you very respectfully, I thank you, and ask you very respectfully for your vote on Tuesday, November 6th, so that I may continue the work, to work for you, the 170,000 people of the Bristol and Norfolk. Thank you.
I also would like to thank the three of you gentlemen for hosting us, and your newspapers hosting this. It's been a great opportunity. I also would like to thank the Senator for his graciousness. You know, when you have an incumbent, it is sometimes a temptation for the incumbent to avoid debates rather than lift up the prestige of his opponent. And Senator Timilty, to his credit, has not avoided any of these debates. He's graciously come and has accepted each of the opportunities as they come, and that is something that's rare in today's politics. And so I thank you for that, Senator, and I'm thankful for the opportunity. For 24 years, as the pastor of Grace Baptist Church in Attleboro, I've answered the call. I've answered that 3 a.m. call. I've walked the halls of our VA hospitals. I have been there to comfort the sick. I've been there to comfort the dying. I have been doing all kinds of things. I have carried groceries up to the third floor of a triple-decker to a family that has none. I have been there over and over again. I've stayed up all night with a man struggling with alcoholism so that I could take him to the detox center the next morning. I have lived life right on the streets. I know what's going on in our cities and towns, and I have worked there, and I know that. I know these things. I believe that if I were to go to Beacon Hill, I think I would bring a different perspective, a fresh perspective, something that is really not up there right now, a perspective of the real world and how it affects real people. It's not that those who are there don't care. It's not that they are incompetent. It's just they don't live where we live, where I live, week after week, day after day. And I believe that if you send me up, it'll send a message to the powers that be on Beacon Hill. We're not satisfied with business as usual. As I said, my opponent has never done anything that I know of that is unethical or immoral or anything along that line. But I believe that by sending me up, it sends a different message, and I would appreciate your consideration on Election Day. Thank you very much.
Thank you both, and thank you all for coming tonight.
This program was made possible through the generous support of your Medfield friends and neighbors, folks just like you. And thanks for watching.